before things were comfortable. There are moments at night when the world feels quieter but not gentler. The noise fades, the lights soften, and what remains is the awareness of things that still don't feel right. Many listen quietly here, night after night. If this calm travels with you, you may stay. Subscribing keeps this silence alive. The way your body settles but never fully rests. The way routines continue even when no one is watching. The way certain discomforts have become so familiar that they no longer register as discomfort at all. This is not about suffering. It is about endurance. Long before comfort became an expectation, people learned how to live with inconvenience, not heroically and not dramatically, quietly. They did not ask whether something felt good, they asked whether it worked well enough, and well enough carried a great deal of weight. In the medieval world, life pressed close, cold entered rooms freely, illness arrived without warning. Darkness did not politely wait outside windows. People did not imagine a future where daily life would be smooth. They imagined a future where it would continue. So they built systems that were tolerable, not kind, tools that reduced risk, not pain, habits that managed fear, not comfort. Over time, those systems hardened into routine. When something hurts slowly, it becomes normal. When inconvenience is constant, it stops feeling personal. It becomes atmosphere. No one remembers the first night a mattress felt wrong. No one records the moment soap burned too much. No one writes about the first time waking was violent rather than gentle. They simply adjusted. Adjustment is one of humanity's oldest skills. History is filled with inventions that did not succeed because they were brilliant, but because they were acceptable. They stayed because removing them felt more dangerous than enduring them. That logic has never disappeared. It has only learned better manners. Tonight is not about judging the past. The medieval world does not need defending or condemning. It needs to be noticed because much of it never left. It lingers in habits you don't question, in routines you perform automatically, in small moments of discomfort you explain away as normal. The past does not announce itself, it blends in. It settles beneath your day, the way stone settles beneath a city. You walk on it without thinking. You sleep on it without asking. You wake up inside it every morning. This story does not ask you to stay alert. It does not demand understanding. It only asks you to listen slowly, not for facts, but for patterns. Patterns of tolerance, patterns of quiet compromise, patterns of things that were never fixed, only softened. As the night deepens, it becomes easier to see how much of modern life is built on inherited solutions. Solutions designed not to comfort you, but to keep things from falling apart. They are not malicious. They are not mistakes. They are leftovers. Leftovers from a time when survival mattered more than ease, when dignity was negotiable, when control felt safer than softness. If something in this story feels familiar, let it be familiar. You are not meant to resist it. History does not repeat loudly. It repeats quietly until it feels like part of you. And that is where this begins. Not in the Middle Ages, but here, in the calm moment before sleep, when the world loosens its grip and the past feels close enough to breathe alongside you. Medieval toothpaste. When cleaning hurt more than decay. Medieval toothpaste was not created to make people feel clean. It was created to make them feel responsible. The intention sounded sensible enough. Remove decay. Prevent disease. Maintain the appearance of order in a body that was constantly under threat from infection, injury, and ignorance. But medieval people did not imagine hygiene as comfort. They imagined it as discipline. To clean one's teeth was not a moment of refreshment. It was a small act of resistance against a world that rarely rewarded the body for cooperation. The substances used tell us everything we need to know about the mindset behind them. Crushed animal bones, burned seashells, wood ash scraped from hearths, salt, charcoal, occasionally powdered brick, added with the calm confidence of someone who believed pain and effectiveness were closely related. These ingredients were not chosen for gentleness. They were chosen because they were available, abrasive, and visibly destructive to dirt. If something could scrape grime off stone or metal, it was assumed it could do the same to teeth. The powders were rough, uneven, and unforgiving. They were rubbed directly onto teeth with fingers, cloth, or small sticks, worn smooth by repetition. There were no bristles designed to bend, no softness built into the process, only contact. And yes, this did remove plaque. It also removed enamel. It stripped away the natural protective layer of teeth until sensitivity became unavoidable. Brushing did not feel clean. It felt final. This was not something you did casually. It was something you prepared for. The experience was not refreshing. It was bracing. Imagine grinding fine sand against your teeth while convincing yourself that discipline mattered more than comfort. That was the daily ritual. Historians, when describing medieval dental hygiene, use careful language. They say it was unpleasant. They say it was abrasive. They say it caused irritation. They rarely say what it must have felt like emotionally. The quiet dread, the hesitation before starting, the knowledge that this was going to hurt and that it was still expected of you. Medieval people were not unaware of the consequences. They noticed bleeding gums. They noticed teeth becoming sensitive to air, water, and heat. They noticed that eating and drinking now carried a sharp edge of discomfort. Some stopped brushing altogether, others continued, not because it worked particularly well, but because stopping felt reckless. This distinction matters. Medieval toothpaste did not significantly improve long-term dental health. Teeth still rotted. Infections still spread. Abscesses still formed, often with lethal consequences. The product hurt. It delivered limited benefits. It inspired no enthusiasm. By any modern standard, it failed. If toothpaste had been a medieval guild product sold with accountability, it would have disappeared quickly. Too much pain, too little payoff. But hygiene was not evaluated through customer satisfaction. It was evaluated through morality. Cleaning your teeth was not about results. It was about showing that you had tried, and trying mattered. In a world where illness was often interpreted as divine judgment or moral failure, visible effort carried weight. Pain endured, voluntarily signaled responsibility. Discomfort became proof of seriousness. This is why toothpaste survived. Instead of abandoning the idea when it failed, people refined it just enough to keep it tolerable. They softened abrasives slightly. They experimented with different textures. They added herbs, not to improve health, but to mask the experience. Mint entered the picture much later. Not as a medical breakthrough, but as a psychological one. Mint made suffering feel cleaner. This was the real evolution of toothpaste, not scientific improvement, but emotional management. The core idea never changed. Scrape the teeth, accept discomfort, trust that effort itself has value. Modern toothpaste still works through controlled abrasion. It simply hides the mechanism behind reassuring language. It promises protection. It promises strength. It promises gentleness. But at its foundation, it repeats a medieval assumption that cleanliness requires friction, that care involves controlled damage. When you brush your teeth today and pause instinctively at a sensitive spot, that reaction is not a modern flaw. It is inherited memory. You are participating in a ritual shaped by centuries of compromise between pain and habit. Toothpaste did not survive because it worked perfectly. It survived because it became routine. And routine is powerful. Once something becomes habitual, its flaws fade into the background. Children learn it early. Discomfort becomes normal. Complaints lose urgency. Eventually, the act itself becomes associated with virtue rather than outcome. Clean teeth did not necessarily mean healthy teeth. They meant you had complied. Even now, toothpaste advertising rarely explains how the product works. It explains how it feels. Fresh, cool, safe. The medieval logic remains intact beneath the surface. The method persists, only the tone has softened. History did not fix toothpaste. It taught it manners. It learned how to smile, how to promise comfort while delivering abrasion, how to reassure without changing its nature. This pattern appears again and again throughout history, and we do not always keep what works best. We keep what becomes familiar enough to stop questioning. Pain, when expected, becomes manageable. Uncertainty feels worse. Medieval people did not enjoy toothpaste. They endured it. And endurance, practiced long enough, turns into tradition. Tonight, when you brush your teeth before bed, you are not performing a modern act of self-care. You are echoing a medieval solution that never quite solved the problem it addressed. The mouth learned to tolerate it. The mind learned to accept it. And history, as it often does, chose familiarity over comfort. Medieval soap, clean enough to be accepted. Medieval soap was not created to care for the body. It was created to discipline it. The modern idea of bathing is wrapped in comfort, warm water, pleasant scents, soft towels, a sense that cleanliness should feel rewarding. In the Middle Ages, none of this applied. Soap was not about pleasure. It was about survival. The goal was not to nourish skin or protect hair. The goal was to remove what could be seen, smelled, or judged: dirt, grease, the unmistakable signs of labor, poverty, or illness. If the skin suffered in the process, that was considered acceptable collateral damage. Most medieval soap was made from animal fat mixed with lye, a substance so chemically aggressive that it can dissolve organic material, including the illusion that bathing should feel gentle. Lye was not chosen because it was kind. It was chosen because it was effective. The resulting soap was harsh, uneven, and unpredictable. Some batches cleaned reasonably well. Others burned the skin on contact. There was no quality control, no standardization, no labels warning of irritation. You trusted the soap maker, which in medieval life was a gamble similar to trusting the weather. Using medieval soap was not a relaxing experience. It stung. It dried the skin immediately. Repeated use caused cracking, flaking, and raw patches that never quite healed. Hair washed with it became brittle and dull. In some cases, it simply gave up and fell out. Baldness was common, and while age and stress were blamed, soap was quietly complicit. People noticed this. They complained. They talked about skin problems, rashes, and burning sensations, and yet they kept using it because the alternative was worse. Medieval life smelled like animals, smoke, sweat, damp clothing, and overcrowded spaces. Odor was not a minor inconvenience, it was social information. Smelling bad marked you as unhealthy, or unclean, or morally suspect. Cleanliness was not associated with comfort. It was associated with trust. If you smelled too strongly, people avoided you. They assumed sickness. They assumed decay. They assumed something was wrong. Soap, no matter how unpleasant, hurt less than social exile. This is an important pattern. Medieval soap did not succeed because it was good. It succeeded because it was necessary. Bathing was not about self-care. It was about managing perception. The skin, stripped and irritated, was a price worth paying for acceptance. But even by medieval standards, soap failed in important ways. It was inconsistent. One batch might clean gently enough. The next caused chemical burns. There was no reliable way to predict the outcome. Ingredients varied, fat quality changed, lye strength fluctuated. A merchant might assure you that the soap was safe, but assurance had no regulatory backing. Soap could cleanse, but it could also damage, and often did both simultaneously. Skin conditions worsened. Existing wounds burned. Infections were aggravated. Medieval people did not connect soap with healing. They connected it with removal. Remove dirt, remove smell, remove visible signs of disorder. The body itself was secondary. Despite this, the idea of soap refused to disappear. Instead of questioning whether bathing should hurt, people refined the process. They experimented with different fats. They adjusted lye concentrations. They added herbs, not to protect skin, but to softened the experience, lavender, rosemary, thyme. These additions did little medically, but they changed perception. Soap began to smell less like rendered animals and more like intention. This shift mattered. Just as with toothpaste, soap did not evolve by changing its purpose. It evolved by changing how it was tolerated. The irritation remained. The dryness persisted. But the experience became framed as necessary rather than brutal. Over time, soap became normalized. Children learned early that washing could sting, that dryness was expected, that discomfort was part of being clean. This normalization is what allowed soap to survive. Even today, soap still dries skin. It still strips oils. It still disrupts the body's natural balance. Entire industries exist to undo what soap does. Moisturizers, conditioners, lotions. We cleanse, then repair. Wash, then soothe. This cycle is not modern. It is medieval. We have simply become more polite about it. Modern soap claims gentleness, but it still removes oils the skin works to produce. It still leaves dryness behind. We tolerate this because the alternative still feels unacceptable. Being unwashed carries judgment. It signals neglect. It signals disorder. The social meaning of cleanliness has not changed. Only the packaging has. Medieval soap failed at comfort. It failed at consistency. It failed at skin health. But it succeeded at one thing that mattered more than all the rest. It allowed people to remain socially visible. Soap did not make life better. It made life bearable in public. And that was enough. History rarely preserves what feels good. It preserves what feels necessary. Medieval people did not love soap. They endured it. And endurance, practiced daily, becomes habit. Habit becomes expectation. Expectation becomes tradition. By the time better soaps appeared centuries later, the ritual was already embedded. Bathing hurt less, but the structure remained the same. Cleanliness still demanded sacrifice, just less visibly. Tonight, when you wash your hands and notice the skin tighten slightly afterward, that sensation is not a defect. It is inheritance. You are participating in a solution shaped by a time when survival mattered more than comfort, and appearance mattered more than sensation. Soap did not get kinder. We got used to it, and history once again chose familiarity over relief. Early eyeglasses. Seeing a little better at a significant cost. Early eyeglasses were not designed to make life easier. They were designed to make letters slightly less blurry and leave everything else unresolved. The problem they attempted to solve was simple. Eyes age, vision fades, text becomes uncertain. For scribes, scholars, monks, and craftsmen whose work depended on precision, this was not a minor inconvenience. It was a threat to usefulness, to income, to relevance. The solution, however, was far from elegant. The earliest spectacles appeared in late medieval Europe as heavy glass lenses connected by frames that balanced directly on the nose. There were no arms to hook behind the ears, no adjustments, no concessions to anatomy. The glasses stayed in place through friction and optimism. They were not worn, they were endured. To read while wearing early eyeglasses required stillness. You sat upright. You held the book at the correct angle. You resisted movement. If you leaned forward, the glasses slid. If you turned your head, they shifted. If you sneezed, they abandoned you completely. Reading became a posture, not an activity. This stillness shaped behavior. People learned to move carefully, to exist more slowly, not out of mindfulness, but necessity. And even then, the glasses barely worked. Early lenses corrected only a narrow range of vision problems, usually farsightedness. If your eyes did not match that specific defect, the glasses offered little benefit. They made text larger, but not clearer. Edges softened, distortion lingered. You could see more, but not enough to forget the effort required to see it. This was the core failure. The benefit was partial, the inconvenience was constant. Eyeglasses also carried social consequences. And they looked strange, they drew attention, they marked the wearer as different. In a world suspicious of unexplained devices, placing glass on your face invited commentary. Some believed eyeglasses weakened the eyes. Others claimed they were unnatural. A few suspected darker explanations. New technology has always attracted superstition, and eyeglasses were no exception. Seeing better than others raised questions. Why did you need assistance? What were you compensating for? What knowledge were you accessing? Reading itself was already associated with power. Enhancing it seemed suspicious. Eyeglasses were mocked openly. They were awkward. They slipped. They required constant attention. And yet people kept using them. Not because they were comfortable, not because they were reliable, but because they extended usefulness. This is where eyeglasses survived. They allowed aging scholars to continue reading. They allowed scribes to keep working. They allowed craftsmen to see fine details a few more years longer. In medieval life, extending productivity was everything. If eyeglasses gave you even a small advantage, that advantage mattered more than discomfort. So people adapted themselves to the tool rather than demanding the tool adapt to them. They learned to sit carefully and to move slowly, to tolerate slipping frames. The glasses did not integrate into the body. The body adjusted around them. This adjustment had a psychological cost. Wearing eyeglasses required constant awareness. You were always conscious of them, of their weight, of their position. They were never invisible. Every movement carried risk. Every bend, every gesture threatened to dislodge them. This created a quiet tension. Eyeglasses made reading possible, but they made living cautious. People noticed this imbalance. They complained, but the alternative was worse. Without glasses, reading stopped entirely. Work ended, status faded. Eyeglasses offered a compromise, an uncomfortable extension of usefulness in exchange for constant irritation. History accepted the trade. Instead of abandoning eyeglasses when their flaws became obvious, people refined them. Frames evolved. Supports were added. Eventually, arms appeared to hook behind the ears. This was not immediate. It took centuries, but each improvement followed the same pattern. Reduce inconvenience just enough to maintain acceptance. The core idea remained unchanged. Glass bends light. Light corrects vision. The wearer adapts. Even modern eyeglasses repeat this pattern. They slide, they pinch, they fog, they scratch, they break at the worst moments. We complain about them constantly, and then we put them back on. This persistence reveals something essential. Eyeglasses did not succeed because they were pleasant. They succeeded because they preserved function. And function historically outweighs comfort. Early eyeglasses taught humanity an important lesson. Tools do not need to feel natural to become indispensable. They only need to solve enough of a problem to justify endurance. This lesson repeats across history. Eyeglasses extended not just sight but authority. Those who could read longer retained influence. Knowledge stayed concentrated. The discomfort of glasses became invisible compared to the power they preserved. By accepting irritation, wearers gained access. And access mattered more than ease. There is something quietly unsettling about this trade. The body suffered so the mind could continue. Pain became acceptable when it served productivity. This logic did not begin with eyeglasses, but eyeglasses made it visible. They sat on the face, impossible to ignore. A constant reminder that seeing required effort. Even today, when eyeglasses fog the moment you step outside or slide down your nose when you least expect it, that irritation is not a modern design flaw. It is tradition. You are participating in a medieval compromise that never fully resolved itself. Eyeglasses were never perfected. They were tolerated into permanence. They asked the wearer to meet them halfway. And then another step. And another. Over time, this negotiation became normal. We learned to adjust them without thinking, to push them back into place with practiced gestures. They became part of the body's routine rather than its comfort. Early eyeglasses failed in every category except one. They allowed people to continue. And history tends to preserve whatever allows continuation, regardless of cost. Tonight, if you remove your glasses and set them beside your bed, consider how little has changed. The shape is different. The materials are lighter. The idea is the same. See better. Endure the rest. Eyeglasses did not evolve to serve the body. They evolved to preserve function. And in choosing function over comfort, medieval people set a precedent we still live with quietly every day. Medieval alarm clocks. Waking was never meant to be gentle. Medieval alarm clocks were not designed to help people wake up. They were designed to make sleep impossible to continue. There is an important difference. Modern culture likes to imagine waking as a transition, a soft shift from rest into awareness. Light filtering through curtains. Sound gradually increasing. Medieval people did not believe in transitions. They believed in interruption. Time mattered deeply in the Middle Ages. Prayer hours, work schedules, market openings, monastic routines. Missing a moment could mean missed income, missed obligations, or missed salvation. Sleep was tolerated, but it was never trusted. So when medieval societies tried to control waking, they did not aim for kindness. They aimed for certainty. Early alarm mechanisms came in many forms, none of them subtle. Some relied on weights attached to cords that slowly descended through the night. When the weight reached a certain point, it triggered a bell. Others used candles marked with lines, nails, or small metal objects. As the candle burned down, gravity took over. A nail dropped. A ball fell. Metal struck plate. Noise happened. That was the entire system. Accuracy was hopeful. Safety was optional. These devices did not measure time precisely. They measured patience. If the flame burned too quickly, you woke early. If it burned too slowly, you woke late. If a draft interfered, the candle might fail entirely. In some cases, the candle did more than fail. Fire, after all, does not respect intention. Trusting your morning to an open flame in a wooden room was not ideal. But medieval life rarely offered ideal choices. Alarm clocks did not ask whether you wanted to wake up. They assumed you needed to. And they made that need unavoidable. When an alarm went off, it did not wake just one person. It woke everyone nearby. Medieval homes were close, walls were thin, rooms were shared. One person's schedule became a communal event. Entire households stirred because one individual needed to rise before dawn. This created tension. Sleep was precious. Interrupting it was resented. And yet alarms persisted, because waking on time mattered more than harmony. This is where medieval alarm clocks truly failed. They were unreliable, they were disruptive, and they were occasionally dangerous. They startled rather than guided. Imagine waking suddenly to a loud metallic crash in the dark, heart racing, unsure whether the sound meant morning or disaster. That confusion was normal. There was no snooze, no gradual fade in, only noise, and noise was treated as a tool. Medieval people hated these devices. They complained about them. They mistrusted them. They feared oversleeping despite them, and yet they kept using them. Because the alternative was worse. Without alarms, waking relied on chance, on daylight, on others. Timekeeping was social. Someone had to watch the hours. Someone had to ring bells manually. This system failed easily. Alarm clocks promised independence. Flawed independence, but independence nonetheless. Even if the alarm worked poorly, it worked without asking another person to intervene. This mattered. The medieval alarm clock was not about comfort. It was about control. Control over time, control over obligation, control over one's own usefulness. So people accepted the terror. They accepted the violence of sound. They accepted the possibility of waking too early or too late. Because the act of trying to wake on purpose mattered. Over time, these devices evolved. Weights became gears. Candles were replaced by springs. Bells became louder and more precise. But the philosophy never changed. Wakefulness must be forced. Sleep is resistance. Noise is authority. Even modern alarm clocks repeat this medieval logic. Phones scream, buzzers vibrate, sirens imitate urgency. We pretend these are neutral tools. They are not, they are coercive. They drag consciousness back into the body, whether it wants to return or not. This is why people negotiate with alarms. We set multiple ones, we hit snooze, we bargain. The hostility remains. No one loves being woken by an alarm. Entire industries exist to soften the experience. Nature sounds, gradual light, gentle music. All of these are admissions that the original idea was flawed. But we do not abandon it. We refine it just enough to endure it. Medieval alarm clocks failed at precision. They failed at safety. They failed at user satisfaction. They succeeded at one thing. They forced waking, and that was enough to preserve them through centuries. This reveals something unsettling. Human productivity has always been built on interruption. Rest is tolerated only until obligation demands otherwise. Sleep is respected only until it interferes with structure. Medieval people understood this intuitively. They did not romanticize rest. They viewed it as a temporary state that needed monitoring. The alarm clock was a reminder the time did not belong to the sleeper. It belonged to duty. Even now, waking feels like surrender. We wake because something demands us. Work, responsibility, expectation. The sound itself carries authority. It does not ask permission. It announces that rest is over. Tonight, as you fall asleep listening to this, consider how deeply this pattern runs. For centuries, humans have built devices whose sole purpose is to interrupt the most vulnerable state of the body. We have improved their accuracy, we have refined their form, but the emotional experience remains unchanged. Resentment, disorientation, reluctant compliance. Medieval alarm clocks did not become obsolete because waking against one's will became culturally necessary. The system persisted because it worked well enough. It created order. And history consistently chooses order over comfort. Tomorrow morning, when your alarm goes off and you feel that familiar surge of resistance, remember that this feeling is not modern. It is inherited. You are responding to a medieval solution that never asked whether you were ready. It only asked whether you were awake. And that question, once asked loudly enough, has always been answered the same way. Medieval candles, light that never promised comfort. Medieval candles were not romantic. They were not cozy. They were not meant to soothe. They were a compromise with darkness. Modern imagination treats candlelight as gentle, soft flicker, warm glow, a suggestion of calm. In the Middle Ages, candles were not an atmosphere, they were a tool, an unreliable one. Most medieval candles were made from animal tallow, rendered fat taken from cows or sheep. This made them cheap enough to use regularly, but it also gave them a personality. They smelled faintly of livestock. They smoked aggressively. They dripped constantly. Lighting a tallow candle did not create serenity. It created vigilance. The flame bent easily. The wick burned unevenly. Hot grease slid down the sides and fell wherever gravity decided. Hands, tables, floors, occasionally faces. Candles did not behave. They required supervision. Beeswax candles existed, but they belonged to another world. Churches, nobles, ceremonial spaces. Beeswax burned cleaner, brighter, more evenly. That difference mattered. Clean light was associated with holiness and wealth. Dirty light belonged to everyday life. For most people, candlelight was dim. One candle barely illuminated a room. Two suggested comfort. Three implied excess. Reading by candlelight was difficult. The flame flickered. Shadows danced. Smoke gathered near the ceiling and lingered. Eyes strained quickly. Headaches followed. People did not relax by candlelight. They monitored it. The candle demanded attention. If the flame guttered, you adjusted it. If the wick burned too fast, you trimmed it. If wax pooled dangerously, you intervened. The light itself was never trusted. Candles failed at efficiency. They failed at consistency. They failed at safety. House fires were common. Records from medieval cities mention them casually, almost routinely. A candle tipped. A spark caught. A building burned. The phrasing is often brief, as if this were expected. Candles were not dangerous in theory. They were dangerous in practice, but there were few alternatives. Torches were too large and too unpredictable for indoor use. Oil lamps required oil, which was not always available or affordable. Candles, for all their flaws, were portable and controllable enough. They burned slowly. They could be extinguished quickly. This made them acceptable. Not good. Acceptable. This distinction explains their survival. Medieval people did not choose candles because they worked well. They chose them because nothing else worked better. Candlelight shaped daily life. Activities ended early. Shops closed at dusk. Work slowed. Darkness dictated schedules. The candle did not extend the day comfortably. It extended it cautiously. Every extra hour of light came with risk. The candle also altered social behavior. Gatherings were smaller at night. Movement was careful. Shadows were watched. Light was precious, but it was never free. Candles consumed resources. Fat had value. Wax took labor. Burning a candle was a decision. You did not light one casually, you weighed the need. This awareness created restraint. Candles failed to create warmth in the emotional sense. They created boundaries. The circle of light marked safety. Beyond it was uncertainty. Dark corners hid dangers, both real and imagined. This psychological effect mattered. Candlelight did not comfort. It reminded people of what they could not see. The flicker was constant, unstable, distracting. The flame was never still. This instability seeped into perception. Time felt uneven at night. Moments stretched. Shadows moved. The candle became a presence, and like many medieval tools, it demanded respect. Despite this, candles endured. They were refined slowly. Wicks improved. Wax was cleaned. Molds became more consistent. Smoke reduced. Dripping lessened. But the essence remained unchanged. A small flame. An unstable light. A quiet threat. Even now, modern candles retain the same basic structure. Wax, wick, fire. We have added scent, color, glass containers. We have removed danger just enough to forget it. This transformation is telling. At some point, candles stopped being necessary. Electric light replaced them completely. And yet we kept candles, not as tools, as symbols. We light them deliberately, voluntarily. We associate them with relaxation, with reflection, with calm. This is a remarkable reversal. Medieval people associated candlelight with eye strain, smoke, and the risk of losing everything they owned to fire. We associate it with baths. This is not because candles changed dramatically. It is because context changed. The candle was freed from necessity. When danger disappeared, only atmosphere remained. But the old qualities are still there. The flame still flickers. The wax still melts. The fire still consumes. We simply choose to ignore these facts. Candles were always a negotiation with impermanence. They burned away visibly. Watching a candle was watching time. The flame shortened. The wax shrank. Nothing about it felt stable. This made candles unsettling companions. They reminded people that light, like life, did not last. Perhaps this is why candles became associated with prayer, mourning, and ritual. They embodied fragility. A candle burned until it didn't. No warning, no negotiation. Medieval people understood this intuitively. They lived surrounded by impermanence. The candle was honest about it. It did not promise safety. It did not promise clarity. It promised only a small delay before darkness returned. This honesty is part of why candles survived. They never pretended to solve the problem of night. They only softened it briefly. History often preserves tools that make suffering tolerable, not comfortable. Candles did not eliminate darkness. They made it negotiable, and that was enough. Tonight, when you light a candle and feel calm settle in, remember that this object once carried fear. It once smelled like animals. It once threatened homes. It once demanded constant attention. The same flame that now suggests peace once signaled risk. History did not improve candles. It changed how we feel about them. The candle did not become safe. We became distant from its danger. And in that distance, discomfort transformed into comfort. The medieval candle still burns the same way it always has. Quietly, unreliably, until it disappears. We just learned to enjoy the flicker. Medieval mattresses. Rest without relief. Medieval mattresses were not designed for rest. They were designed to make lying down possible. The modern idea of sleep is filled with expectation, comfort, support, recovery. In the Middle Ages, sleep was not romanticized. It was tolerated. Rest was what happened when labor paused, not something that needed optimization. A mattress, in medieval terms, was simply whatever separated the body from the floor. For most people, that separation was thin. Mattresses were commonly filled with straw, hay, dried leaves, or chaff. Materials chosen not for softness, but for availability. These fillings shifted constantly. They compacted. They broke down. What felt adequate one night became uneven the next. The mattress did not hold a shape. It surrendered to gravity. Sleeping on one required adaptation. You learned where to place your weight. You learned which positions were tolerable. You learned how to wake up slowly to avoid stiffness that felt permanent. These mattresses trapped heat poorly. They trapped moisture effectively. Dampness lingered, odors accumulated, mattresses absorbed life. Sweat, spills, biological realities that could not be cleaned easily. They were rarely washed, often never. Changing a mattress meant replacing the filling entirely, which required labor and materials that most people did not have to spare. So mattresses aged. They became compressed, uneven, unforgiving. They also became inhabited. Straw mattresses were inviting environments for insects, fleas, lice, bed bugs. These were not exceptions. They were expected. The mattress did not protect you from the night. It hosted it. Sleep was often interrupted by itching, by movement beneath the fabric, by the quiet awareness that something else was present. People complained about this. They tried remedies. Herbs were added. Plants believed to repel pests were mixed into the straw. These efforts rarely worked. The insects adapted faster than the mattresses. Feather beds existed, but they were not the solution they appear to be in retrospect. Feathers clumped. They shifted. They lost loft. They trapped heat excessively. Sleeping on feathers often meant waking drenched and uncomfortable. Moisture built up. Odors followed. Feather beds were status symbols, not comfort devices. They signaled wealth. They did not guarantee rest. Even the wealthy struggled to sleep well. Beds were shared. Rooms were crowded. Privacy was rare. Sleep happened collectively. The idea of a mattress designed for individual comfort did not exist. You slept where space allowed. The mattress was one part of a system that did not prioritize rest. This explains the core failure of medieval mattresses. They did not improve sleep. They merely allowed it. The body adapted around discomfort. People woke stiff, sore, tired, and then they worked. Sleep was not expected to restore. It was expected to pass. Despite this, the mattress survived. Not because it worked well, but because lying directly on the ground was worse. The ground was colder, harder, damp. A mattress, however flawed, softened that reality slightly. This small improvement was enough. The human body is remarkably willing to accept minimal relief if it is consistent. Over time, mattresses became normalized. Children grew up knowing no alternative. Discomfort felt ordinary. The expectation of waking refreshed did not exist. Fatigue was part of life. In this context, mattresses were not judged harshly. They did what they were supposed to do. They existed. The evolution of mattresses was slow. Better fillings appeared, wool, horsehair. These improved resilience slightly. They lasted longer. They shifted less, but they were still far from comfortable. The structure remained simple. There were no springs, no layers designed to respond to pressure. The mattress did not support the body. The body endured the mattress. Even now, this relationship lingers. Modern mattresses promise rest. They advertise support. They claim to adapt. But the core idea remains unchanged. Put something beneath the body. Reduce contact with the ground. Everything else is refinement. The medieval mattress reminds us that comfort is a recent expectation. For most of history, sleep was not meant to feel good. It was meant to happen. This perspective changes how we understand fatigue. People were not exhausted because they slept poorly. They slept poorly because exhaustion was normal. The mattress did not cause discomfort. It reflected life. This is why mattresses persisted. They did not solve the problem of rest. They acknowledged it. A thin layer between the body and the world. Enough to survive. Tonight, as you settle into a bed designed to support every contour of your body, consider how unusual this is. For centuries, people lay down knowing they would wake sore. They accepted it. They adjusted their expectations. The medieval mattress did not improve over time because no one demanded that it do more. History does not improve tools until discomfort becomes unacceptable. And discomfort remained acceptable for a very long time. Medieval mattresses were not cruel by design. They were indifferent. They did not promise relief. They offered distance from the ground. That distance, however small, was enough to preserve them. Sleep happened not because it was comfortable, but because the body eventually surrendered. And surrender, repeated nightly, became normal. The mattress endured because humanity endured with it. Rest did not need to be pleasant. It only needed to be possible. Medieval pillows. Comfort was not the point. Medieval pillows were not designed to support the neck. They were designed to exist. The modern pillow carries an expectation, softness, alignment, relief. In the Middle Ages, none of this applied. A pillow was not an instrument of comfort. It was a boundary, something placed beneath the head so that the body understood where rest began and where the floor ended. Most medieval pillows were firm, unyielding, filled with straw reeds, dried grass, or coarse cloth, stuffed tightly until it resisted pressure rather than absorbed it. These were not pillows you sank into. They were pillows you negotiated with. Lying on one did not feel soothing. It felt deliberate. The head rested, but it did not relax. Softness was not a priority. In fact, softness was often viewed with suspicion. Too much comfort suggested indulgence. Indulgence suggested moral weakness. Rest was acceptable. Enjoyment was questionable. This belief shaped how pillows were made. A firm pillow kept the body alert even while lying down. The neck remained tense. The spine did not settle. Sleep came slowly. But slow sleep was not considered a problem. Sleeping deeply was not an objective. Sleeping enough to function was sufficient. Many medieval pillows were small, barely large enough to support the head. Others were cylindrical, forcing the neck into a fixed position. Turning over required effort. The pillow did not adapt to the sleeper. The sleeper adapted to the pillow. This adaptation became routine. Children learned early how to place their heads just right, how to shift weight carefully. how to accept stiffness as normal. Neck pain was not discussed as a condition, it was assumed. Pillows also served secondary purposes. They elevated the head slightly to reduce breathing difficulties. They kept hair away from moisture. They created a symbolic separation between the head and the rest of the body. The head mattered more. It held thought, identity, soul. Raising it slightly off the ground carried meaning. This symbolism mattered more than comfort. Feather pillows did exist, but like feather mattresses, they were not universally pleasant. Feathers clumped. They shifted unpredictably. They flattened quickly. A feather pillow might feel soft for a moment, then collapse entirely. Sleeping on one required constant adjustment. You pushed feathers back into place. You reshaped the pillow repeatedly through the night. Rest was fragmented. These pillows also trapped heat and moisture. Sweat accumulated. Odors developed. Feather pillows were luxurious in appearance, but not always in experience. They signaled wealth. They did not guarantee sleep. Even among the wealthy, pillows failed to deliver comfort reliably. The expectation of waking without stiffness did not exist. Pillows were not blamed for discomfort. Discomfort was part of life. The true failure of medieval pillows was not physical. It was conceptual. They were never designed to help the body recover. They were designed to mark a resting position. This difference matters. A pillow was not a tool for restoration. It was a signal. Here the head rests. Here the body pauses. Nothing more was required. Despite this, pillows survived. They survived because they fulfilled their minimal purpose. They separated the head from the ground. They provided a sense of order, and that was enough. Over time, pillows became normalized. People stopped questioning whether they should feel good. They accepted firmness. They accepted stiffness. The idea that sleep should be comfortable did not emerge until much later. Even today, traces of this mindset remain. We argue about pillow firmness. We debate soft versus hard. These arguments are ancient. They echo a time when comfort was secondary to function. Modern pillows promise alignment and support. They promise science. But beneath these claims lies the same basic idea. Put something under the head. Everything else is refinement. The medieval pillow reminds us that expectations shape experience. If you expect nothing, you accept everything. People did not wake from sleep disappointed. They woke tired and assumed that was normal. The pillow did not fail them. It did exactly what it was meant to do. It existed. There is something quietly unsettling about this. So many modern frustrations come from expectations unmet. Medieval people avoided this by expecting very little. Sleep was not sacred. It was necessary. The pillow was not a comfort object. It was a marker of rest. This perspective kept disappointment low, but it came at a cost. Chronic discomfort was normalized. Pain was unremarkable. The body learned to endure. Pillows, like mattresses, reflect a broader truth about medieval life. Care was practical, not soothing. The goal was survival, not pleasure. The pillow's failure to comfort was not seen as a flaw. It was simply how things were. Tonight, as you rest your head on a pillow designed to cradle and adjust, consider how new this idea is. For centuries, the head rested on firmness, on resistance, on acceptance. The medieval pillow did not ask how you felt. It assumed you would adapt. And you did. Over time, the pillow became invisible. Not because it worked well, but because it became expected. We do not remember tools that fail gently. We remember the ones that persist. The medieval pillow persisted by doing almost nothing, just enough to justify its presence, just enough to remain. And in that minimal success, it secured its place in history. Rest was not meant to be kind. It was meant to happen. The pillow ensured that it did, and that for a very long time was sufficient. Medieval buttons. When convenience refused to arrive. Medieval buttons were not designed to make dressing easier. They were designed to make clothing stay where it was told. That distinction explains almost everything. The modern button is invisible when it works. It closes. It holds. It disappears into routine. In the Middle Ages, buttons were neither invisible nor routine. They were deliberate. They were slow. They required attention. Before buttons became common, clothing relied on ties, pins, belts, and layered wrapping. Garments were adjusted, not sealed. They moved with the body, sometimes too much. Buttons promised order, small, precise, controlling. They appeared in Europe around the late medieval period, and from the beginning they were not meant for speed. They were meant for structure. Early buttons were small discs made from bone, wood, metal, horn, or fabric. They were sewn individually, often by hand, onto garments that were already heavy and layered. Buttonholes were not standardized. They were cut and stitched carefully, one by one. Nothing about this process was quick. Getting dressed with buttons required time, focus, dexterity. Cold fingers struggled. Stiff fabric resisted. Buttons did not glide into place. They demanded negotiation. This was the first failure. Buttons slowed everything down. Dressing became a task rather than a transition. You did not throw on clothes. You assembled yourself. That this mattered in a world where mornings were already difficult. And yet buttons spread. Not because they were convenient, but because they controlled shape. Buttons allowed garments to be fitted closely to the body. They held fabric tight against the torso. They created silhouettes. This changed how people looked. Clothing became more structured, more restrictive. Buttons made garments less forgiving. Weight fluctuations mattered more. Movement became limited. The body was no longer merely covered, it was contained. This containment carried social meaning. Buttons signaled refinement, control, status. They suggested that the wearer had time, that they could afford complexity. Loose garments belonged to labor. Buttoned garments belonged to intention. This distinction mattered more than comfort. Buttons were uncomfortable. They pressed into the body when sitting or bending. They created tension points in fabric. They pulled unevenly. When a button broke, the garment failed visibly. There was no subtlety to the failure. A missing button exposed gaps, revealed underlayers, announced disorder. This made buttons stressful. You were always aware of them. You checked them, you adjusted them, you worried about them. Buttons demanded vigilance. Pins, by comparison, were simpler. They could be adjusted quickly. They could be repositioned. Buttons locked clothing into place. Once fastened, there was no flexibility. This rigidity made buttons impractical for physical labor, and yet they persisted. Because medieval society increasingly valued appearance over ease, clothing became a signal. Buttons helped enforce that signal. They created clean lines. They suggested discipline. The discomfort was secondary. Buttons also introduced a new kind of intimacy with clothing. You touched each one individually. You engaged with the garment piece by piece. Dressing became a ritual. Slow, intentional. Undressing took time as well. There was no casual removal. This slowness changed behavior. People moved less abruptly. They planned movements. Buttons encouraged restraint. In a subtle way, they trained the body. This training extended beyond clothing. It reinforced a worldview where order mattered more than speed, where control mattered more than comfort. Buttons failed to simplify life. They complicated it. But they offered something medieval society increasingly desired: predictability. Once fastened, a button stayed fastened. Unlike ties, it did not loosen gradually. Unlike pins, it did not slip unexpectedly. It either held or it failed. This binary quality appealed to a mindset shaped by rigid hierarchies. Buttons mirrored authority. They locked things in place. Over time, buttons multiplied. Sleeves gained rows of them. Coats featured dozens. Some were purely decorative. Others were functional. Often, it was hard to tell the difference. Decoration itself became a kind of control. Buttons turned clothing into architecture. They segmented the body, defined boundaries. The garment no longer adapted to the body's movement. The body adapted to the garment. This adaptation was expected. Discomfort was normalized. People did not complain about buttons hurting when sitting. They adjusted posture. They accepted restriction as part of presentation. Buttons were not blamed for inconvenience. They were praised for refinement. This reframing ensured their survival. Even as faster, simpler closures existed, buttons remained. Hooks, ties, laces. All were easier in many ways, but buttons carried cultural weight. They signaled civilization. The irony is clear. Buttons were introduced to solve a problem that did not urgently exist. Clothing already stayed on. What buttons really solved was an aesthetic desire. They made clothing look controlled, and that mattered more than ease. Even today, buttons persist despite alternatives. Zippers are faster, Velcro is easier, and yet buttons remain. They require time, they require precision, they fail unpredictably. We still choose them. This persistence reveals something uncomfortable. We often prefer systems that slow us down if they make us feel orderly. Buttons do not serve the body efficiently. They serve the idea of the body. They suggest deliberateness. This is why formal clothing still relies on them. Buttons force you to slow down, to commit to the act of dressing, to prepare. There is something quietly medieval about that. The button's failure was never mechanical. It worked as intended. Its failure was experiential. It did not make life easier. It made it more controlled. History preserved it anyway, because control often outweighs comfort. Tonight, as you fasten or unfasten a button without thinking, consider how old this negotiation is. You are engaging with a medieval solution that chose discipline over ease. Each small click is a reminder. Order takes time. And history, once again, accepted inconvenience in exchange for structure. The button did not survive because it was the best option. It survived because it felt right. And feeling right in human history has always been more persuasive than feeling good. Medieval public toilets. When privacy was a rumor, medieval public toilets were not designed to protect dignity. They were designed to relocate a problem. The problem was simple. Human waste had to go somewhere. That was the entire philosophy. Comfort was not considered. Privacy was optional. Hygiene was theoretical. What mattered was containment. In medieval cities, especially growing urban centers, waste accumulated quickly. Houses were crowded. Streets were narrow. Animals lived alongside people. Something had to be done. The solution was not elegant. It was practical, in the most minimal sense of the word. Public toilets were often long, wooden benches with holes cut into them. Nothing separated one hole from the next. No walls, no dividers. You sat beside strangers, sometimes acquaintances, sometimes complete unknowns. Conversation happened. Eye contact happened. Silence happened when no one quite knew what to say. Using the toilet was a communal act. This was not seen as shocking. It was simply life. Privacy, as a concept, had not yet become a requirement. Bodies were not hidden. Functions were not concealed. That does not mean people enjoyed it. They tolerated it. Tolerance is a recurring theme in medieval infrastructure. These toilets were positioned over pits, cesspools, or flowing water if the location allowed. In some cities, waste dropped directly into rivers. The logic was straightforward. Water moves. Water carries things away. What it carried away and where it went was not deeply considered. Downstream was someone else's problem. The smell was constant. It did not come and go. It lived there. Buildings absorbed it. Clothing carried it. Air trapped it. The odor was not unpleasant in a temporary sense. It was structural. You did not notice it after a while. That, too, was a form of adaptation. Medieval public toilets were rarely cleaned. There was no schedule, no standardized process. Sometimes waste was removed when pits overflowed. Sometimes it wasn't. Insects gathered, rodents moved freely, disease spread easily. But the connection between waste and illness was poorly understood. If people became sick, explanations turned elsewhere. Bad air, divine punishment, imbalance of humors. The toilet was rarely blamed. This allowed the system to persist. If the cause of suffering is not identified, the solution is never questioned. Public toilets also erased hierarchy briefly. Nobles and laborers might use different facilities, but within those categories, equality was enforced. Everyone sat the same way. Everyone waited. There was no graceful way to hurry. This leveling effect was quietly unsettling. In a society built on rank and separation, public toilets created moments where status mattered less. That discomfort was tolerated because necessity outweighed pride. The failure of medieval public toilets was not that they didn't work. They worked. Waste went somewhere else. The failure was everything else. They failed at cleanliness, they failed at safety, they failed at dignity, they failed at making people feel human during one of the most vulnerable acts, and yet they survived. Because the alternative was worse. Without shared facilities, waste accumulated inside homes. Streets filled, disease spread even faster. Public toilets were unpleasant, but they prevented catastrophe. This made them acceptable. Medieval people did not expect comfort from infrastructure. They expected function. If something worked badly but prevented something worse, it was a success. This mindset shaped centuries of design. Over time, small refinements appeared. Some toilets were placed slightly apart from main living areas. Some had basic coverings. Water flow was improved in certain regions, but the core experience remained unchanged. Communal, exposed, uncomfortable, the psychological impact lingered. Toilet use became something to endure rather than experience. You did what you needed to do and left. This urgency reduced loitering. No one stayed longer than necessary. In a strange way, the discomfort enforced efficiency. There was no temptation to linger. Centuries later, when privacy became valued, the legacy remained. Modern public restrooms still carry anxiety. We hesitate before entering. We assess cleanliness instantly. We avoid contact with surfaces. We seek privacy even when it technically exists. The medieval memory lingers emotionally. We do not trust shared spaces during vulnerable moments. Even now, public toilets are rarely associated with calm or comfort. They are tolerated just as they were then. The doors and stalls of modern restrooms are thin. Sounds travel, smells linger. The sense of exposure never fully disappears. We have improved the structure, but not the feeling. This continuity is not accidental. Public toilets solve a logistical problem, not an emotional one. They never have. Their role is to manage necessity, not dignity. History did not fix this. It merely disguised it. Walls were added, doors installed. Signs politely remind us to wash our hands. But the underlying discomfort remains. Public toilets are spaces we enter reluctantly and exit quickly. No one decorates them lovingly. No one seeks them out. This avoidance is ancient. Medieval public toilets taught humanity an enduring lesson. Some necessities cannot be made pleasant. They can only be managed. So when you step into a public restroom, tonight or tomorrow, and feel that subtle tension, that instinctive desire to leave quickly, remember this feeling is inherited. You are responding not to modern inconvenience, but to centuries of shared discomfort, a medieval solution still shaping your nervous system. History did not improve public toilets. It simply taught us to tolerate them quietly and then to leave as soon as possible. What stayed quietly? History rarely ends things cleanly. It does not correct mistakes and move on. It keeps what works just enough. Across everything you've heard tonight, there is a pattern that never announces itself. It does not arrive with innovation or triumph. It arrives quietly, through tolerance. Medieval people did not keep these products because they were good. They kept them because abandoning them felt worse. Toothpaste hurt, but rotting teeth felt like chaos. Soap burned, but smelling unclean meant exclusion. Glasses slipped, but blindness ended usefulness. Alarms startled, but oversleeping risked survival. Candles smoked, but darkness swallowed certainty. Mattresses itched, but the ground was colder. Pillows failed, but the neck still needed something. Buttons slowed everything, but looseness suggested disorder. Public toilets humiliated, but waste had to go somewhere. None of these solved life. They merely managed fear. This is what history preserves best. Not comfort, not elegance, but control. Control over the body, control over time, control over appearance, control over decay. And control, even when painful, feels safer than uncertainty. Medieval people lived close to consequences. Illness arrived quickly. Cold punished immediately. Hunger did not negotiate. Their tools reflected that urgency. They were not designed to soothe. They were designed to reduce risk. If something reduced risk by even a small margin, it stayed. This explains why so many medieval solutions still echo today. They were never replaced. They were softened. The abrasives became gentler, the lie became diluted. The bells became digital tones. The straw became foam. The holes gained doors. But the core experience remained. You still scrape your teeth. You still dry your skin. You still brace when the alarm sounds. You still shift on your mattress. You still hesitate before a public restroom door. Modern life did not eliminate discomfort. It distributed it more politely. We learned to tolerate inconvenience as long as it arrived packaged as improvement. This is not failure. It is continuity. History does not move forward by erasing old ideas. It moves forward by normalizing them. Over time, what once shocked becomes routine. What once hurt becomes acceptable. What once felt wrong becomes tradition. Eventually, discomfort becomes invisible, and invisibility is the final stage of endurance. When something becomes invisible, it no longer invites resistance. It simply exists. This is why these medieval designs survived. They did not demand admiration, they demanded acceptance. Acceptance is quieter than approval. It lasts longer. Tonight you are surrounded by softened medieval logic. You wake when something forces you awake. You clean yourself with substances that remove more than dirt. You dress your body into shapes, chosen long before you were born. You rest on materials that promise relief, but rarely deliver it fully. You move through shared spaces designed for efficiency, not dignity. None of this is accidental, it is inherited. But inheritance does not mean intention. You did not choose these systems. You adapted to them, just as medieval people did. They adapted because life demanded it. So did we. There is something unsettling in realizing how little human experience has changed at its core. The tools look different. The expectations sound kinder. But the negotiations remain between comfort and control, between ease and order, between dignity and necessity. Most of the time, necessity wins. This is not a criticism, it is an observation. History is not cruel. It is practical. It keeps what survives pressure. What survives pressure is rarely what feels best. It is what feels manageable. This is why the past never truly leaves. It settles beneath the surface, shaping routines so quietly that they feel natural. By the time we notice them, they are already indispensable. And perhaps that is the most medieval idea of all, that life is not meant to be optimized, only endured well enough to continue. If this realization feels heavy, let it pass. You are not meant to solve it tonight. Understanding history is not about fixing it. It is about recognizing patterns without needing to escape them. The medieval world was not primitive. It was honest about limits. Modern life hides limits behind refinement, but the limits are still there. Breathing, sleeping, waking, cleansing, waiting. These rhythms have not changed. Only the language around them has. So, as this story quiets and the night deepens, allow the weight of it to settle gently. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not failing modern life. You are simply continuing something very old, a long human habit of adjusting, tolerating, and moving forward anyway. History did not fix these things. It taught us how to live with them quietly, and in that quiet, sleep comes more easily. Let it